How is it possible that we can't find a solution to a 50-year economic decline? The problem lies in the very foundations of economic science, which is why we need a system that will change all this. The Global Macroeconomic Simulator, GMS. The media often publishes data that reassures the public. An example is the magazine E15.cz, who wrote about a 31% increase in the economies of Italy and Britain over the past decade. The problem is, that's simply not true.
In this episode, we will also address a topic that keeps millions of people in uncertainty: how to prepare for the arrival of artificial intelligence and avoid job loss shocks. First, let's show how even very serious media misinforms the public. The magazine E15.cz wrote, like Britain, the Italian economy has also strengthened by 31% in the last decade. By confusing nominal and real GDP, we create the illusion of prosperity and prevent public discussion about 50 years of structural decline.
An article written in this way gives the impression that the standard of living in Italy has increased by almost a third, which is of course not true.
Most of the 31% reported by E15 is inflation. If we subtract inflation, Italy's average annual real growth over the last 10 years is just 0.98%. That's not strengthening, that's the alarming state of the economy.
As long as the media writes misleading information, like E15 magazine did, the public will think our economies are fine. But they are not. They only grow below average, and moreover due to increasing public debt. The article in E15 is just one of thousands. So how do you stop it? 50 years of disinformation. The only way: to allow scientists and media access to source files and current calculations. This will create a broad professional debate and rapidly accelerate economic research.
GMS by Eurostat, a unified platform for all who work with data. Anyone with the appropriate accreditation would receive verified, expert information here, instead of unauditable copies. Scientists would no longer have to search for sources and they would simply follow the work of their colleagues. If everyone shared one platform based on facts, it couldn't happen that politicians wouldn't inform the public about structural decline for 50 years. GMS would ensure that the truth gets out.
Why is electricity so expensive in Europe? Let's repeat that. We voluntarily shut down cheap nuclear power plants and at the same time replaced this capacity with gas and coal power plants, which are extremely expensive due to emission allowances and expensive gas. In addition, we had to allocate capacity to stabilize the Ukrainian grid.
We are talking about power plants that contribute to the total installed capacity of all power plants in the EU, by just 1.5%. How is it possible that this marginal change in the supply side caused such a huge price shock for all of Europe?
The wholesale price of electricity is determined according to the merit order principle, which in practice means that it is based on the most expensive electricity needed to meet demand. This principle means that even cheap electricity from nuclear and solar is sold at the price of the most expensive, gas. Politicians, when creating the merit order principle, could not have foreseen an extreme event like war. And even if they had foreseen it, they still do not have a tool with which they would calculate the optimal legislation for setting wholesale prices for hundreds of different scenarios that may occur in the future. Spreadsheet editors are no longer enough. We lack an economic supercomputer. We lack a global macroeconomic simulator.
Merit order in practice. Who is profiting from the EU electricity crisis? For example, RWE is achieving more than 3 times the profit it made before the crisis. Poor quality laws are to blame due to the lack of simulation of their impacts. We see a similar problem in other areas. People feel afraid because a large number of jobs are threatened by the advent of artificial intelligence and no one knows what the world of work will look like. But politicians are looking for solutions as a consequence. GMS will help us prepare in advance and set optimal conditions for economic growth and living standards.
In Part 8 we informed you, China is draining our economic pond. EU countries have to borrow money to maintain at least a minimum of growth. This capital outflow uses transfer pricing, internal loans, profit repatriation and more.
We believe that this capital outflow may be targeted Chinese state strategy, how to weaken the EU and the US, who face the same problem, while strengthening the Chinese economy. In 2024, the EU's deficit with China reached a staggering €304 billion. The overall capital deficit is much higher. For example, the repatriation of profits is not reflected in either the trade balance or direct investment.
Neither the EU nor its scientific teams have the tools to prove and quantify these hidden practices. This is the strongest argument why we need GMS that would expose these hidden flows online and defend our economies.
Today we only monitor the trade balance in absolute terms. 1 million imported is equal to 1 million exported. In reality, however, every store has economic growth and prosperity, another influence that we have not yet measured. For example, the European Union exports to the United States a machine on the development and production of which 78 EU experts worked for 12,500 hours. It earned 1 million for this machine. At the same time, however, Europe also bought Windows operating systems from the United States for 1 million, on which, in the calculation, only 5 Americans worked for only 500 hours.
This disparity will result in huge inefficiency. To be able to buy Windows for €1 million, we had to work 25 times more hours, while in this model example an American buys for 1 hour of work 25 hours, the work of a European.
We have just introduced you to the principle of a new economic metric from the CzechWay team, net trade balance. Even governments have no idea that by borrowing we are creating a false illusion of prosperity in order to cover up the 50-year decline in the real growth of the economies of EU countries. EU international trade can reduce European welfare while strengthening the welfare of other countries. Let's stop the outflow of capital with the help of the GMS. The net trade balance is a method to reveal the truth and protect our economies. That is why we need to simulate and confirm the hypothesis on the GMS. If AI is imported to a greater extent into the EU, the capital outflow risks intensifying Europe's structural problems.
It's not about not letting American or Chinese companies do business in our market. It's about setting rules and forcing these companies to reinvest the money they've made back into the EU. Our main economic goal must be to stop the outflow of capital from the European Union. The greatest paradox of contemporary economics. The International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, the World Bank and central banks already own supercomputers. So why haven't they yet uncovered a 50-year structural decline in growth rates?
The big data these institutions work with is not a simulation of the global economy. Big data does not create new metrics that will help us advance economic knowledge. The failure to reveal a 50-year decline is a collapse of methodology. The responsibility lies with these political institutions, which prefer to preserve the data as their monopoly.
That's why we need to break this data monopoly and allow independent scientists access to the source files. This will not only lead to more innovation, but a large group of scientists will not allow such a 50-year failure to happen again.
Look at the dramatic increase in government budgets in key countries after 1973. For example, 50 years ago, the French government operated with a budget of around 20% of GDP. Today, France's budget is over 50% of GDP. Even a sudden increase in taxes did not help, and from that time on, France began to incur massive debt. These graphs were defended in a doctoral thesis by Dr. Kubica at the University of Mining and Technology in Ostrava.
You might be surprised, but social programs are not the cause of the recession, they are the consequence. The cause is trade inefficiency, which causes capital to flow out of our economy. That's why we need to calculate the net trade balance. That's why we need GMS to eliminate the causes of the recession.
The Green Deal is a necessity, but we do not take into account that we only function thanks to debt. We do not take into account the 50-year structural decline of the economy of most EU states. The current pace of implementation of the Green Deal reduces competitiveness companies and increases the real threat triggering the EU economic crisis. We must first start addressing the causes of economic decline so that we have something to pay for the Green Deal.
Video summary. First of all, Eurostat, IMF and the rest of the political institutions have failed. Their data is insufficient and does not show that real growth of EU economies has been declining for 50 years. Governments, media and citizens do not know this. Secondly, we put in much more effort into exports than our competitors. It is not unusual that we invest 12,500 hours of work, while we only get back 500 hours for imports, and that is a 25-fold loss of our European energy. Let's measure trade by the net trade balance. Again, neither institutions nor governments know this. Third, politicians pass laws based on feelings, not data. This has caused energy prices to rise and threatens further political failure. That is why we need a macroeconomic simulator. And most importantly, social programs are not the cause of the 50-year recession. We are getting into debt and yet growing less because we are allowing capital to flow out of Europe. Again, politicians have no idea of this.
What's next? In the next episode, video number 10, we will take a detailed look at the 50-year structural decline of the German economy. We will reveal data that our governments have ignored so far, and for the first time we will present our new metric, Germany's net real GDP growth, to see if Germany's economy would grow if it were not in debt. This will be the biggest shock.
Thank you for watching the video. Together, we are motivating governments to start a professional debate. Using science, we will ensure a higher standard of living for all and move economic science forward.